Josh Berry's finalizing a contract to drive for Stewart-Haas Racing in 2024, and Alex Bowman is returning at Charlotte for the Coca-Cola 600. What's going, guys? It's Daniel, and welcome back to our video. We got a ton of NASCAR and other motorsports stories discussed here today on the channel. Let's go ahead and just jump straight into those really quickly. We're going to go ahead by starting to talk about Cenex Tools, as it was announced on Wednesday afternoon that Cenex Tools has announced a multi-year deal with Richard Childress Racing. Cenex Tools, I believe, has been working with Richard Childress Racing for a little bit of time, so it's great to see that they're officially announced a partnership. This is pretty big for that company. It'll be a really good tool company to work with as RCR, and nonetheless, really cool to see a company working with Richard Childress Racing. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Xfinity. As it was announced this morning that Xfinity is the third founding partner of the inaugural Chicago Street Course race. Currently, Blue Cross and Blue Shield and McDonald's are the other two partners that are part of the Chicago Street Course event. And now Xfinity becomes the third big partner. Xfinity, of course, one of the biggest companies in the United States and probably in the world as well. Great to see them partnering up with the Chicago Street Course event, and this is pretty big for that event. There's only one more to announce, as we're about a month away. I would expect it'll be coming in the next few weeks. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about the Charlotte purse money for this weekend. So every time we have a NASCAR Cup Series, Xfinity Series, and Truck Series race, Bob Parkers puts out the purse money on his page. And according to him, for the Cup Series, it's $9,421,275. For the Xfinity Series, it's $1,317,391. And for the Truck Series, it's $767,542. So pretty good purse money for this weekend, probably the most for all the races this year so far, as of course with it being a home race, and also of course for the Cup Series having the most money. As always, the Cup Series is going to have the most money with the charters, but since there's more cars in the field this weekend than usual weeks, there's 37 cars this week compared to 36 cars, that's why the purse money is up overall. So that's some pretty good purse money for the weekend. I think a lot of drivers and fans are looking forward to this weekend. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Hendrick Motorsports. As reported by Adam Stern today or yesterday, the Hendrick Motorsports is now selling plush dolls for $24.95. Its first product released with a new licensee, toy maker Orange Onions. Orange Onions, I think, is a pretty big company. A lot of the old toy stuff have been basically from Junior Motorsports, so this is like an outside company that's coming into play that is working with Hendrick Motorsports. Nonetheless, I think that's really cool, really awesome, and glad to see that those plush dolls are being made by Orange Onions. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Michael Gutella. As it was announced earlier today that Michael Gutella has been named Chief Operating Officer at Joe Gibbs Racing. Michael Gutella, for those of you who don't know, have been working in Multimatic Racing, a race team that's been competing in IMSA and also in the World Endurance Championship for a very long time. This is a huge deal in a lot of ways for Joe Gibbs Racing, as this guy's been doing the R&D stuff for Joe Gibbs, basically for the Multimatic, for a very long time, and now he's going to get the opportunity to work with Joe Gibbs Racing. I think this could really help out Joe Gibbs Racing in a really big way. He could really help JGR for the long-term future. We don't know the long-term future of Joe Gibbs Racing really past 2023 or 2024, but I think they're looking toward the future, and Michael Gutella is going to be a really big part in helping out Joe Gibbs Racing, not for just a few years, but probably for a very long time going forward. Glad to see he's getting a shot to work with Joe Gibbs Racing. Really awesome stuff. And now we're going to head on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about the Xfinity Series race at Charlotte. As it was announced earlier this evening that the Xfinity Series race at Charlotte, the start time for the race has been moved up an hour to 12:19 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Originally, the race was supposed to start at 1:19 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Because of the weather for this weekend, they have made the right call and right decision to go ahead and move the race up a little bit earlier. And like I just said, it's because the weather does not look really good for this weekend. And to be honest, it hasn't been getting much better. The chances continue to increase. A few days ago, it was in the 50 to 60% range, but in the last day or two, the chance have increased up into that 80 to 90% range. And I'm going to be honest, even though I think this is absolutely the right call to move the race up a little bit earlier, I'm still skeptical about this race happening. And if this race does not happen on the scheduled time, I'm worried about the future because remember, Portland is the next race for Xfinity, so they got to travel out. So they, at the latest, have got to get the race done likely by Tuesday or Monday. So it's going to be really interesting to watch, but nonetheless, I think this is the right call and a great move. I wish it would come a little bit sooner. I wish they could find a way to move the race a little bit earlier, but nonetheless, I think this is a great call for Xfinity overall, and they had to make the decision in my honest opinion. And now we're going to hedge on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about NASCAR rules. Now, NASCAR has updated the rulebook over the last day or two, in the last week, I should say, and there's a couple of big rule things that I do want to talk about. First, NASCAR's updated rules when it comes to the fire suppression system. They now must include the engine compartment. This is a new part that has to be included to the fire suppression system, basically to kind of help when it comes to fires and all that kind of stuff. The other new rule is that there's new procedures if the leader at time of caution is involved in a wreck or something along those lines. Basically, it's just new rules that kind of get some things changed in the sport. I'm not against these rules. I kind of agree with the rules that they've decided to bring into play. And those are some of the new rule changes. Bob Pockers did put that out, so you can read those rules later on his page. But nonetheless, those are the new rules that are coming into play for NASCAR. And now we're going to hedge on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Jake Crum. As it was reported in the last day or two about Jake Crum, we talk about the situation with Landon Huffman. Obviously, you've been following this channel and following around social media. You saw the situation with Landon Huffman. Annabeth Crum basically got a bump and run classic short track race and moved by Landon Huffman. Then she tried to rival him down the straightaway. She ends up wrecking herself. Then basically didn't get a lot of damage, but then later, she during a caution just runs way into the back in a dangerous situation and completely destroys Landon Huffman's car and her car. Then Jake Crum goes over and assaults Robert Huffman and basically stomps on him and kicks him and punches him. And then eventually Robert Huffman, I think, gets back up and I think lays a few punches down himself as well. It was announced in the last couple days that Jake Crum has been charged with assault. He has been arrested and brought to jail. Now, he has posted for bond, but it was, I think, announced today that he has been banned for the rest of the year. If I'm not mistaken, he cannot return to Hickory Speedway for the rest of the year. But nothing, to my understanding, on Annabeth Crum has been announced, so there has to be things announced. First, I do want to also talk about the fact that Hickory Speedway has basically been blocking people on Facebook, even though this is now the second time, I think, in the last year where they have screwed up massively, and both of the times have been involving Landon Huffman. Look, I believe that they both should be banned from the racetrack or any racetrack. You cannot do what both drivers did. It's one thing for Annabeth Crum to do the things that she did on the racetrack, but the fact that Jake Crum went and assaulted Robert Huffman for just some classic stuff like short track racing and all that kind of stuff, the fact he did that is just completely unacceptable and completely unforgivable in my honest opinion. And like I said, both drivers should be completely banned. Not for the rest of the year, for life. Both people should be banned from the racetrack. They should never be able to come back. And I hope they're booed. Because apparently, Jake Crum, well, I think he's actually allowed to sit in the grandstands. He can't spot, but I think he's allowed in the grandstands, if I'm not mistaken. So that's another thing. Why is he allowed to go in the grandstands? Because he can just go up to the spotter stand and quintessentially spot. So they completely screwed the poocher, in my opinion. And Hickory needs to do something about this because this is uncalled for that he's allowed to go back into the stands and do this and spot. He should not be allowed to spot, and he should be completely banned altogether. I hope both eventually get banned. I'm glad at least some justice has been served where the guy's been charged with assault. That should be a big indicator that you probably should not be allowed in a racetrack when you've been in jail for domestic violence or something like that. So he needs to be banned for 100% and banned from the racetrack altogether, in my honest opinion. And now we're going to hedge on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Kyle Larson. As Kyle Larson has actually gotten a new sponsor, and it's called Yinya Ramen Yinya Ramen will be the first new sponsor that Kyle Larson has had since Hendrick Cars, and this will be a new company that Kyle Larson, actually the first new sponsor he's technically had since Ineos back in 2019 when he drove for Chip Ganassi Racing. This is definitely a really, really huge deal. Now, a big question around this is, will Yinya Ramen be an actual sponsor on his car? No, Yinya Ramen is going to be very similar to what Hailie Deegan has for her. She still has a big endorsement deal with Monster Energy, and while they haven't really sponsored her trucks or anything that she basically drives in, they have sponsored her in a personal endorsement deals because they look at her social media. Kyle Larson will have the Yinya Ramen basically on his patches, as patches on his fires too going forward. I think this is really, really huge for Kyle Larson, though, that he technically has a new sponsor. We know that there's other sponsors that have been wanting to work with Kyle Larson in the past. I'm glad to see that he technically does have a new sponsor, and I think this is really, really huge for him that he can pick up new sponsors. We all know what happened a few years ago. I'm glad to see, though, he continues to get new sponsors. It's really huge for him, and happy to see that he has officially found a new sponsor. Really awesome and really exciting stuff, in my honest opinion. And now we'll go ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about Shane Van Gisbergen. As it was reported by Adam Stern on Wednesday evening that Shane Van Gisbergen says, I'm seeing how Ross Chastain races and he in new news every single week. I'm glad I'm teammates because he's someone I don't want to piss off. He also talks about Trackhouse racing and her success as well. Now, Shane Van Gisbergen, of course, will be making his NASCAR Cup Series debut in about a month from now at the Chicago Street Course event, driving the 91 car, the Project 91 car for Trackhouse Racing. Now, Shane Van Gisbergen, unlike other drivers, has a lot of experience in stock car-like vehicles with the V8 supercars, which NASCAR kind of did some ideas and took some ideas from the V8 supercars and put them into quintessentially the next-gen car. So Shane Van Gisbergen knows how to turn it up and quintessentially be an aggressive driver. And Shane Van Gisbergen, unlike a lot of drivers who've come from the other forms of racing, have had an opportunity to race with the next-gen car, with the Project 91 or all the other drivers from other forms, he's a driver I feel like that really could come into play and be a contender at Chicago Street Course. In fact, I think for a lot of people, he is going to be a favorite. He's going to be in a really strong car. We see how Trackhouse has been, especially at the road courses last year. Remember, Ross Chastain won at Dakota, and we also saw Daniel Suarez win basically at Sonoma. I'm looking at this team to be really, really strong, and I'm expecting Shane Van Gisbergen to be really, really quick. And I think he's someone that's not going to put up with a lot of these drivers' BS, and I think he's going to be able to handle himself really, really well. My prediction is I think he finishes at least around the top 10, top 5 range. It may be tough for him to win, but I think he's got a shot to win. I think he's going to be really, really fast. I think he's going to be a contender. Trackhouse is going to bring him a really strong car. And nonetheless, I think Shane will have a really good shot to be a contender in the event. I'm excited nonetheless to see he's coming over and racing in NASCAR. He's a driver I've been kind of begging for to have a shot, an opportunity to race in NASCAR. Marcus Ambrose praised him quite a bit in the past week or two. And I think he's someone that's going to do a really awesome and a really good job in that car, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we are talking about the Nashville Fairgrounds. Now, we obviously know that part of the Nashville Fairgrounds stuff has kind of been improved. However, there has been some issues that are starting to rise recently with the Nashville Fairgrounds. Adam Stern reported on Wednesday evening that Nashville Fairgrounds, that Metro Nashville's legal department filed a lawsuit to block a new state law making it easier for the Metro Council to approve a new racetrack at the Nashville Fairgrounds. First thing I do want to mention is that this is not a new racetrack. For anyone that does the research and knows racing, the Nashville Fairgrounds have been around for over 118 or 119 years. Next year will be the 120th anniversary of the Nashville Fairgrounds. This track also used to be in NASCAR. It was in NASCAR technically from like the late 50s, early 60s, all the way up to 2000, something along those lines. And the fact that people do not understand and do the research on that baffles me just a little bit. Not blaming Adam Stern because he's putting out an article. But you have to remember also one thing with the Nashville Fairgrounds. Their taxpayers, if I'm not mistaken, are not going to be paying money. And from what they have said, and Jerry Cobble has said, he has said that they're not going to run events at this track every single year. It's going to be like every other year. So you could probably have a race at Bristol Concrete or Bristol Dirt one year and then go to Nashville Fairgrounds. It's like the 30-year plan. So they're not going to have racing every year. They also plan to have less racing at the racetrack with this move. And obviously, a lot of the people that are against this move are a lot of people who live in those condominiums. But we move to a racetrack, guess what you're going to hear? Race cars. And that soccer stadium is going to be extremely loud. So I just don't get why the frustration are trying to stop this. This could be huge for the city. A lot of people do want it in Nashville, but there's a lot of people who are against it. But unlike other cities that are just completely against racing in general, you do have a lot of people in the Nashville area who are fans of the Nashville Fairgrounds, who kind of grew up with the Nashville Fairgrounds event. And I think that this will get approved. I know that they're having hurdles to try to get through at this point, but the mayor is in support of it. A lot of people are for it. And if it does get approved and normal issues come up, this track should come into play. So the question is going to be, when will we see racing at the Nashville Fairgrounds? I think it will be around 2025 or 2026 if it gets approved from the other side, because one of the parts that has been approved from the National Fair Board, but now you got to get the Metro Council side on. It's got to go through that. You've got the mayor who's in favor of it, so I think that's going to be a huge part that's going to help that out. Nonetheless, it's kind of frustrating to see all this kind of stuff going down, and I really hope they can get this figured out and under control really, really soon, because it needs to happen, and needs to happen really quickly, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead, jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about Stafford Speedway. Now, Freddie Kraft put out a tweet about a week or two ago when he had the Truck Series race at North Wilkesboro, saying that the Truck Series schedule should be, I believe, around 90% short tracks or stand-alone races. Well, Stafford Speedway actually commented on Freddie Kraft's post, and they actually said that they tried to get a Truck Series race in recent years at their facility. But according to them, NASCAR apparently decided against going to Stafford Speedway. Now, we obviously know there's been a little bit of a growth of short track racing here in the Truck Series recently, with the additions of Milwaukee and Indianapolis Raceway Park. But I've said this before and said this again. The Truck Series needs to kind of go back to its roots, where it's not a developmental series, because I think the Truck Series should not be a developmental series. And drivers like Hailie Deegan and Derek Kraus, who've come from that, probably do better, even though we know Derek Kraus is somewhat part-time with Colleague now. But other drivers in the series have proven that they're better in Xfinity and can develop there a lot better, like Hailie Deegan. I imagine Christian Eckes, if he goes Xfinity, even though he's been doing really good in trucks, I think he developed really, really good in the Xfinity series as well. But talking about Stafford going on the schedule, Stafford, I think, deserves a day. They need to get up into that northeast area of the country. There's not a lot of racetracks in NASCAR currently that are in that northeast area. You got New Hampshire that's in that area. You obviously do, of course, have other tracks that are kind of close to that. You do have, obviously, Dover's kind of in the northeast area, though it's a little bit more southeastern, closer to that region in the southeastern part of the northeastern part. And then, obviously, you've got Watkins Glen. You don't have a lot of options that are available right now, so that's something to kind of keep in mind. I really hope that Ben Kenny listens, and I hope, because Ben Kenny, I think, someone who does listen to what a lot of us fans want, and I really do hope that there's a chance that they could bring this racetrack onto the Truck Series schedule. I think it'd be huge. We've seen the crowd, especially for SRX races and Wheel and Modified Tour races. We've seen how successful it has been. So I really hope it ends up happening. I hope this track gets an opportunity to be on the truck schedule in the foreseeable future. I do think the chances are definitely high, and I think we could end up seeing it happening, but we're going to have to wait and see. But I think the chances could end up happening that Stafford could get a Truck Series date, hope maybe in the future. I know it sounds like they're trying to, but I really do hope that we get to see Stafford on the Truck Series schedule in the foreseeable future. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next story of today's episode as we're talking about North Wilkesboro. Now, we've talked a lot about North Wilkesboro in the last couple of weeks, and the reason being is because this past weekend, we saw the return of North Wilkesboro on the NASCAR schedule for the first time since 1996. Obviously, Kyle Larson put on a whooping in the NASCAR Truck Series race near the end of that. Remember, he had to start a little bit farther back, but once he got the lead, he completely dominated it. Outside of Bubba Wallace challenging him late in the Truck Series race, Kyle Larson put on a whooping. And then the Cup Series race, Larson started at the back, fell back after a speeding penalty, and came up to the front, pretty much had the new T-Rex car, and basically ended up winning the event by a large margin. In fact, Joe Suzuki reported that it was the largest margin in Truck Series in NASCAR history in the All-Star event. Now, when we talk about it now, is the future question. It's about the future of North Wilkesboro. There's people, and we've heard hearing rumors that there could be an All-Star race back at the track in 2024. Maybe there's talk of a dirt race coming up for the track in 2024. Regardless, so there are some big stuff that's eventually planned for North Wilkesboro. And Marcus Smith actually responded, I believe, as Claire B. Lang from Sirius and NASCAR Radio. And he says that the chance of North Wilkesboro returning in 2024 in the future are really, really high. And I do agree with Marcus Smith. And Marcus Smith, I trust him a lot when it comes to this. NASCAR and a lot of the people in the area would not invest as much money, and SMI would not invest as much money as they've invested if they did not have plans for the region and did not have plans for the future of North Wilkesboro. I think the chance of having a points plan event are really, really high. However, I also think the chance of having the All-Star race in 2024 are very, very high. Now, a lot of people I saw on social media are saying we should not go back to North Wilkesboro. I completely disagree. North Wilkesboro needs to stay on the schedule. And outside of the Cup Series race, which admittedly was not very good, the other racing was great. But we all have to remember that short track racing outside of really, I would say, Richmond, the short track racing hasn't been as good. And honestly, the first half of the All-Star race, I actually thought was really, really good. Once Kyle Larson put on a whooping and kicked everybody's butt, the race wasn't as good. But again, as a Kyle Larson fan, I was very, very happy. But I saw so many people blaming the racetrack. You can blame the worn out track all you want to, but that worn out track did create some really interesting tire strategy, and guys were slipping and sliding all over the place, and that was what kind of drew a little bit of incitement of the event. For me, I think North Wilkesboro is going to come back in 2024, but the big question is going to be, is it going to be the All-Star race, or is it going to not be the All-Star race? I think it could be the All-Star race again in 2024. There was signage going up and some things that people saw and took pictures of over the last week saying it would be the All-Star race. But remember, things can change, and Marcus Smith did also mention that they were just starting to work on talks with NASCAR about 2024. They're also focusing on the TV deal. We've got that going on at the moment, and I wouldn't be surprised if Speedway Motorsports Incorporated is also involved in those talks with those companies right now. I think even though the ratings were not that good, I think a lot of it is the fact that it wasn't on Fox. I don't know why the Cup Series race, the All-Star event, was not on Fox. Make it make sense. But nonetheless, I think the North Wilkesboro will be back on the schedule in 2024. I hated seeing all the negativity toward North Wilkesboro. If you look at your history, it's always been a one-groove racetrack. But I really hope it does come back. I think it deserves an opportunity to be back on the schedule in 2024. I'm glad to see it came back. I was so happy the racing, while the racing wasn't as good in the Cup Series race, all the other racing this week was superb and sublime. So I hope North Wilkesboro does come back in 2024 as actually a points-paying event. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the next major story in today's episode as we're talking about Bubba Wallace. Now, Bubba Wallace has been in the news over the last week for a lot of unfortunate reasons. One of the 2 or 3 main reasons why he's been in the news is because of a lot of the booing that happened after the Truck Series race, and he responded to a reporter in regards to the booing, and he says he gets used to it. When he went out to basically do his all-star intro, he basically did what Kyle Busch did back in 2018 in Chicagoland, and I thought that was really, really, really funny. But there were 2 major controversies that came into play. Obviously, you had the middle finger situation. NASCAR has said that they basically are going to go ahead and not penalize him for, which I think is absolutely the right call. And then you had the other situation with the radio communication saying some things I'm not going to say on here, but it's just stuff that's completely sad and completely uncalled for. Now, Dale Jr. went on the Dale Jr. down. We've had a couple other drivers defend Bubba, but the biggest one that really defended Bubba was Dale Jr. And Dale Jr. said a quote that really stuck with me. And he says, defends Bubba Wallace in a really big way. And he says that Bubba Wallace puts up with a lot more bullshit than anybody deserves. Absolutely 100% Dale Jr. is spot on, and I cannot agree with him anymore. Bubba Wallace has put up with a lot more BS than I think any one of these drivers have deserved. Dale Jr. mentioned this on the podcast. He was sitting in the NASCAR 75 group. He was sitting next to Carl Edwards and Matt Kenseth, if I'm not mistaken, and they were hearing the booing. And the drivers in the NASCAR 75 were getting irritated and frustrated with the fans completely booing him, telling Bubba Wallace he should not be in NASCAR. And I'll say this about Bubba Wallace. Bubba Wallace 100% deserves to be in this sport. And you look at his best stretch right now. He's having one of his career stretches. In the last 6 or 7 races, if you count the All-Star race, he's had 3 top 5s, 4 top 10 finishes, has led quite a few laps, and has only had 1 finish outside the top 12. And guess where that was? At Talladega, where he was going for the victory and going for the win, battling Ryan Blaney and Kyle Busch for that win. Bubba Wallace is really improving in a big, big way. And just seeing all the BS that Bubba Wallace has to deal with, and I feel like it's been getting worse and worse and worse over the last few years. And sadly, all this crap that Bubba Wallace has to deal with, he didn't bring this on himself. All this was caused by NASCAR for not defending him 3 years ago and all the other situations that ended up happening. So I'm very happy to see that Dale Jr. is coming out and defending Bubba. And I think every driver in NASCAR should come out and defend Bubba. And there have been drivers in the past that have defended Bubba Wallace. Tyler Reddick's one driver comes to mind who defends Bubba Wallace. We've seen other drivers recently, like Corey LaJoie, come defend Bubba. And a lot of NASCAR drivers are friends with Bubba Wallace, and they will defend Bubba Wallace in any way. And I like that Bubba Wallace is performing in a really big way because he's shutting a lot of people up right now. And I can't wait to see him continue to perform more and more and more. He needs to continue doing it. I think wins are right around the corner. And you think about 2311 Racing. Bubba Wallace at this point in 2022 was 22nd in points. He's 15th in points, 23 points above the cutoff line, which is ironically his number. So I think Bubba Wallace just has to continue performing. I love Adele Jr.'s defending him. I love drivers are defending him. More drivers in the industry need to talk about this, need to say something about this, and defend Bubba Wallace in a big way. And we can't have that kind of stuff happening going forward, and it needs to be addressed. And I'm glad that NASCAR is cracking down and trying to figure out who did it. Apparently, there's rumors going on that one of the people who did it apparently was bragging on Facebook that they did it, which whoever that person is, you're probably not going to be coming back to NASCAR anytime soon once they find out that you're the one who were saying the bad things about Bubba. Bubba doesn't deserve a lot of hate he gets, and it's just frustrating as a fan, and it's completely undeserved and uncalled for, in my honest opinion. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the first of two major stories in today's episode as we are talking about Alex Bowman. Now, I did a full video talk about this on the channel yesterday, but it was officially announced yesterday that Alex Bowman will be returning to the number 48 car for Hendrick Motorsports this weekend for the Coca-Cola 600. And he's been medically cleared to get back behind the wheel of the number 48 car this weekend. Now, a big question that was coming into play was he going to receive a playoff waiver? Well, according to it, he has officially received a playoff waiver. Now, he actually did a 170-lap test at North Wilkesboro on Tuesday to get approved. There were some people complaining about that on social media, which obviously you're going to have people complaining, but it was a NASCAR-approved test so that he can get back behind the wheel of the number 48 car. Now, Alex Bowman is currently at this moment sitting 5 points below the cutoff line, which a lot of people thought he was going to be a lot more points below the cutoff line. But right now, he's, like I said, only 5 points below. He can easily make that gap up. The big question is going to be, did he rush his health back to get back behind the wheel, or is he going to feel good enough? Because he talked to the media a few weeks ago, and he said it was a little hard to do ordinary activities. Him standing up and walking around wasn't a big issue, but laying down at night, basically he's worried about dropping the jack and stuff, and that could be an issue going forward for Bowman. But I simply am really happy to see that Alex Bowman is back behind the wheel of the number 48 car because he's a driver who was extremely consistent, had been leading the points for that 60-point penalty, and he's definitely within striking distance. I easily think he's going to get back in the playoffs. I think he's got the speed. Blake Harris is a crew chief, and Blake Harris is definitely one of the best crew chiefs in the NASCAR Cup Series garage currently at the moment right now. So this is huge for him. He's got Blake Harris, because I think if he had another crew chief like Gray Guys, his performance might not be as good. The question is going to be, will they have a relief driver for him? I would expect that Josh Berry is going to be a relief driver for the rest of the year. Now, obviously, we're going to be talking about Josh Berry near the end of today's episode. But obviously, you talk about Berry. He did a very good job. And I'll talk about him now for just a second. Josh Berry, I have to give him a lot of props this year because Josh Berry, in my opinion, did a really good job for being a driver before this year who had no next-gen experience and had 3 top 10s. People were having ridiculous expectations for him, and I really do believe that Josh Berry did live up to the hype and live up to the expectations, and that's why he's likely going to get a cup ride on a full-time basis in 2024, driving for another team we're getting into here in just a little bit. Josh did a very good job. He impressed, almost won some of the races he did this year, substituting for Chase Elliott and also for Alex Bowman, and I'm glad to see he got those opportunities and those shots this year to get those opportunities to cup because he deserved those opportunities. But now going back and talking about Alex Bowman. Alex Bowman, I'm very happy, like I said, he's back. I said that a minute ago, but I'm very happy to see that he's officially returning to the number 48 car. Some people thought he wasn't going to come back this week. Bob Pockers had noted he was likely going to return this week, and I'm glad that Bob Pockers was absolutely right on the money that he was coming back because he deserves to be back. He's a driver who's worked hard to get back. He got the test and he got an approved test to go there and try it out in North Wilkesboro. So I'm very happy to see that Alex Bowman is going to be back this week. I think he's going to do solid. I'm not expecting him to contend for the victory, but I think by the end of the year, he'll be contending for wins. The question is going to be is when we start having more guys below the cutoff line start winning, because right now, there's only 7 spots that are left available right now. There's a lot of guys that have not won this year that could easily win. Bo Chase Elliott and Alex Bowman, who are currently below the playoffs right now, could easily win. But you got guys above that could win. Keselowski's had pace and speed at times. Kevin Harvick's been fast. Ross Chastain's been a top 3 or top 4 guy most of the season. You've got other drivers like Daniel Suarez, who's really good at road courses. Ty Gibbs has been an impressive rookie this season. There's going to be a lot of hurdles for Alex Bowman to go through, but I think of how inconsistent the field has also been in 2023, I think that's really going to be a huge player in helping Alex Bowman out. So I'm excited nonetheless to see that he's coming back this week. I think he's going to do a really, really good job long term. I think he'll maybe struggle a little bit in the Coke 600, but I think by the end of the year, you're going to see a really return Alex Bowman, and I think he will be performing in a big light. So glad to see Alex Bowman returning, and I'm glad to see he's back behind the wheel of the number 48 car this weekend for the Coca-Cola 600. And now we're going ahead and jump on to the final major story of today's episode as we're talking about Josh Berry. Now, we've already kind of talked about this story over the last couple weeks, but we have a new update in regards to the Josh Berry story. So according to Jordan Bianchi, who works The Athletic, multiple different sources have told him that Josh Berry currently is finalizing a contract to drive for Stewart-Haas Racing in 2024. Now, obviously, he is likely going to drive the 4 car in 2024. Josh Berry, of course, has been substituting this year for Chase Elliott and Alex Bowman. Over the last couple weeks, has been rumored to be driving the number 4 car in the 2024 season. Now, for the last couple years in 2020 on a part-time basis, in 2021 and 2022 and 2023, we've seen Josh Berry race in the NASCAR Xfinity Series. And Josh Berry has scored 4 or 5 wins in the NASCAR Xfinity Series, and last year was able to cross the line and make it to the Championship 4. Got 3 wins, like I said, in 2022. When I think of Josh Berry, I think he's a driver who's outperformed the equipment, especially for a guy who doesn't have as much experience as others. Yes, he has a lot of late model experience, but Josh Berry is a driver who can always get the best out of equipment. And I think that's something that Stewart-Haas Racing is really looking at right now, is the fact they need somebody who is going to come in there and do really, really good, because they're a team that's kind of in a little bit of a struggle bus right now long term. And they were going to need somebody who was going to have to replace Kevin Harvick, because remember, Kevin Harvick is retiring at the end of the 2023 season to go up to the Fox Sports booth starting in the 2024 season. I think this is a great move for Stewart-Haas Racing to happen. It's saying in the next couple weeks, so I think it will happen. Now, the other question is, who will be his crew chief? Well, according to the article that Jordan Bianchi did end up reporting, it sounds like that Rodney Childers is likely going to return to crew chief for Josh Berry in 2024, which I will admit is a little bit surprising, because I would have thought they would go on to the leader and move Rodney over to work with the 14 team, since a lot of people at Stewart-Haas Racing do believe that Chase Briscoe is going to be the leader of the team. But I think this is also a really good move for Josh Berry as well, to have a driver, the crew chief, like Rodney Childers. Rodney Childers, in my opinion, is one of the greatest NASCAR crew chiefs of all time. He's won championships with Kevin Harvick. He's a person who knows how to win poles as a crew chief and always starts up front. And they have been the best performing team at Stewart-Haas Racing for years. Now, let's talk about why this move is likely going to be happening for Josh Berry to go to the 4 car. Well, there's a couple big reasons. Number one, Junior Motorsports, we know that they've been trying to get up to the Cup Series for 2024. However, it sounds like the Junior Motorsports having a little bit more hurdles to get up the Cup. And also, Dale Jr. has publicly said that if he wants Josh Berry to go Cup racing, he doesn't want him to start with Junior Motorsports, especially if they're having troubles to getting up to speed quickly. The second reason why is because remember, Dale Jr. is really good friends with Tony Stewart. I don't know if you all remember the Dale Jr. down recently, but Dale Jr. said to Tony, I need you to do a favor for me. That favor, I think, is picking up Josh Berry. And we all know that Tony Stewart sees a lot in talent, and that's why he went with him. The third big reason why, though, is with Kevin Harvick Incorporated Management. About a week or two ago, Adam Stern reported from the Sports Journal reported that Josh Berry is likely going to be signing with Kevin Harvick Incorporated Management, is closing on a deal to sign with them. Kevin Harvick Incorporated Management is Kevin Harvick's organization. It's basically KHI Management. They're getting back into racing, but they have a management company, and they work with a lot of drivers in the NASCAR Cup Series, Xfinity Series, and Truck Series as well. It seems like Stewart-Haas Racing has become Stewart-Haas Racing. But I think this is another reason why he's likely going to sign. I think this is a really, really good move building toward the future. But that's not the only potential move that's going to happen for SHR, because SHR is going to have some pretty big shakeups going into 2024. Obviously, we know that we're going to likely see Josh Berry in a 4. Chase Briscoe right now is the only one that's completely set for Stewart-Haas Racing. I would imagine that Ryan Preece is going to drive the 41 next year, but that 10 car, it sounds like it's between Harrison Burton and Zane Smith, who's going to get the 10 car right now. And Harrison Burton is becoming the favorite to drive the 10 car. So like I said, it's starting to sound like it's becoming Stewart Harvick Racing instead of Stewart-Haas. Stewart Harvick Racing, which honestly, if Kevin Harvick was owning Stewart-Haas Racing, I think that team would be in a much better position right now than it currently is. But a lot of people are looking at this move. He's also got sponsored funding when you talk about Josh Berry from Tire Pros. And I think this is a good move for Stewart-Haas Racing to bring Josh Berry in. While not a lot of Cup Series experience as a driver, he has a lot of experience racing, and he's been in racing for many, many years. And I think it's really great that he's finally going to get the shot and finally the opportunity. Now, what are my predictions in regards to Josh Berry and how I think he'll perform? I don't expect him to perform as good as Kevin Harvick did. Let's be honest, Kevin Harvick is a top 10 all-time great, and it's going to be really hard to live up to those expectations of a GOAT like Kevin Harvick. But I think Josh Berry will contend for wins. I think that this 4 car is really, really strong, and I think that especially if Rodney Church is likely returning to be the crew chief for Josh Berry, I think that Josh Berry is going to perform very, very good next year. My expectation is that he's going to make the playoffs next year. I think he will be a top 15 or top 20 driver most of the year. We'll get quite a few top 10s and some top 5s. But I think there's also a chance he could win his first career NASCAR Cup Series race. I think those cars are definitely capable of getting it done, and I think he's going to have a really good opportunity and a shot to do that. Nonetheless, though, I think this is overall a fantastic move for Stewart-Haas Racing to bring him in. But you look at SHR long term because he's going to go by talk about Harrison Burton. They've got to look at other drivers for Xfinity Series pipeline. Cole Custer, Riley Hurst, we don't know their futures past this year. We probably know that Haley Deegan is probably part of SHR development at this point. She's likely going to be part of that group. SS Greenlight could be where she could go in the future as well. But nonetheless, I do believe that Stewart-Haas Racing is going to be in a better position with Josh Berry coming into play. Now, just put Zane Smith in the 10 car and not Harrison Burton in the 10. But I think it's likely going to be Harrison Burton in that 10 car in 2024. But again, really happy to see Josh Berry's getting the opportunity and a shot to drive the number 10, the number 4 car, and likely will be announced in the coming days and weeks. It could happen this weekend, but it sounds like it'll be in the next 2 or 3 weeks that we're going to see Josh Berry in the 4 car. So that is going to be today's NASCAR news and motorsports news video. I want to thank you guys for watching. Please like, subscribe to the channel. Notifications on so when a video does go live on my channel. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram, and support me on Patreon as well. Links description below over that, and comment your thoughts below on today's video. How excited are you to see Josh Berry drive the 4 car in 2024? And how well do you think it'll perform? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And what are your thoughts about all the stories discussed in today's episode, including the story around Bubba Wallace and Alex Bowman returning? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Later tonight on the channel, we have the NASCAR Truck Series race to be from Charlotte Motor Speedway, and pending the weather, we should have multiple videos potentially on the channel over the weekend. Obviously, if any major news breaks and silly season news breaks, we're going to have that dropping on the channel as well. We also have the biggest day coming up of motorsports. We got the rain races potentially. We've got the Netflix series, which is Formula One, and then, of course, the big Indianapolis 500. So anyways, like I said, I want to thank you guys for watching today's episode, and I'll see you guys tomorrow and other days for other motorsports content and NASCAR content on the channel like this. Take care, everybody.